Fikra for Studies and Development, Fikra SD, is an independent, nonpartisan Sudanese research center and policy organization dedicated to advancing peace, progress, and knowledge, promoting democratic transformation, and supporting sustainable development in Sudan and the wider region. Sudanese Dialogues is the signature podcast from Fikra SD, brings you in-depth analysis and sharp insight into Sudan's latest developments and unfolding dynamics. Welcome to a brand new episode of Sudanese Dialogues. Let's dive in.
Okay, welcome. Today we're doing a deep dive into, well, a really complex and frankly pretty surprising situation. We're looking at food security in Sudan, right in the middle of the conflict. We're drawing mainly on a recent FAO report, which also got some coverage elsewhere.
That's right. And the picture it paints is, well, it's complicated. We know the war, which kicked off back in April 2023 between the SIF and RSF, has hit key sectors hard. Agriculture, livestock, really battered.
Yeah, the devastation is clear. Farming halted, infrastructure smashed, millions forced to flee. We hear about famine looming.
Exactly. But here's the twist. Based on missions late last year and early this year, it actually highlights remarkable resilience, even recuperation in those same sectors.
Resilience. Okay, that's the paradox we need to unpack today, right? Severe disruption, but also this surprising bounce back. What's really happening and, what could it mean?
Well, let's start with the numbers because they're quite something. Cereal production for the 2024 seasons. It hit 6.7 million metric tons.
Wait, 6.7 million? How does that compare?
Get this. It's a 62% increase over the previous year, the first year of the war. 62%.
Wow.
And it's even 7% above the average of the last 5 years.
Okay, hold on. A 62% increase during a war. Given everything we just said about the chaos, where did this production even come from?
It was largely driven by sorghum. That's the traditional staple in many areas. Sorghum production specifically was up a massive 77% from 2023 and 30% above its 5-year average.
77%, just for sorghum.
Yeah. And millet and wheat also saw significant jumps from 2023, about 16% and 30%, though admittedly they're still below their 5-year averages.
So these core traditional crops really recovered strongly. Did farmers actually manage to plant more land?
They did, yeah. The total cultivated area grew to 15.1 million hectares. That's a 10% increase over the season before.
Even with militia controlling key farming areas like Khartoum, Darfur.
Right. Even with those fertile zones often inaccessible, it really points to incredible adaptation and just underlying capacity in other parts of the country.
But that capacity must be under huge strain. The report mentions severe shortages, right? Seeds, fertilizer, fuel, and costs going through the roof.
No, absolutely. Those input shortages are a massive challenge, and it's compounded by the wider economic collapse driven by the war. Think about inflation running at over 240% by late 2024.
240%.
Yeah. It just means the cost of everything farming, supplies, daily food has become incredibly difficult. Farmers can barely afford inputs. Families can barely afford food. Plus, the Sudanese pound. It lost over 3/4 of its value against the dollar.
Okay, so we have this amazing surge in production, but the economy is in free fall, making everything unaffordable. So what does all this food production actually mean for people trying to eat? Can they access it?
That's the critical question. Despite the production gains, Sudan's estimated cereal need for 2025 is about 8.42 million metric tons. So even with 6.7 million produced and you factor in existing stocks, there's still a gap, about 2.7 million tons short.
A 2.7 million ton deficit, even with production way up. Where is that shortfall concentrated? Is it across the board?
It's overwhelmingly wheat. Wheat makes up something like 91% of that gap. But here's something interesting. There's actually a surplus of sorghum. About 980,000 tons.
A surplus of sorghum?
Yeah. And the report kind of hints that this surplus could, potentially, help reduce import needs if it's managed cleverly. Maybe traded or used by aid agencies locally.
So more sorghum is technically available, but you still have prices for sorghum and millet nearly 5 times higher than before the conflict.
Exactly. It shows that the economic crisis, the access issues, the market fragmentation, it's overriding the production gains for a lot of ordinary people.
And what about livestock? Is it a similar story?
Similar in terms of resilience, yes. Good rainfall helped pastures, but prices have also surged dramatically there. The dairy cow costing, 438% more year on year in some places early this year. Exports are picking up slightly, but still way down from pre-war. And disease is a growing worry because vet services, vaccination campaigns, they've all been disrupted.
So it leaves us with this really stark contrast. You've got undeniable local farming and livestock capacity, showing amazing resilience, even boosting production, despite everything, the war, the economy, the destruction, and yet millions displaced, markets broken, and half the population, 24.6 million people, acutely food insecure, with famine still a tragic risk.
Right. And this is where the source really pushes for a sort of fundamental shift in how humanitarian aid works there.
Yeah.
For a long time, the focus has been largely on importing food into Sudan.
Bringing it in from outside.
Yeah. But the evidence here, this proven resilience of Sudanese farmers and herders, it suggests that strengthening the local food systems isn't just, a nice idea. It's practical, it's effective, and crucially, it seems much more cost efficient in this specific context.
Right. Prioritizing local production, local capacity over shipping and food aid. What's the core thinking there?
A set of recommendations from Fikra SD, they really lay out a path forward.
A path forward.
And their main argument really is that there needs to be a fundamental, almost an urgent paradigm shift in how everyone approaches this.
A fundamental shift. Okay. So our mission here then is to get into why they think that shift is needed and, what does it actually look like according to them?
Yeah, what's the problem they see?
Exactly. What's wrong with the current way of doing things?
Well, the core critique is basically that the traditional model, the one heavily reliant on importing food for aid, it acts more like a temporary fix, a bandage.
A bandage, right. Needed sometimes.
Sure, in like acute emergencies, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the argument is it can actually undermine Sudan's own ability to feed itself long term. Doesn't build lasting stability.
Okay. Because if you're just shipping food in all the time, you're not necessarily helping local farmers grow it.
Or the local markets distribute it. Exactly.
Right. So the proposed shift is away from that import dependency towards building something inside Sudan itself.
Precisely. The core idea is building what the source calls locally anchored resilience. It's about empowering Sudan, really, to feed itself from within.
Okay, locally anchored resilience. I like that phrase. So what are the key pillars of this approach? What do the recommendations say?
Well, it starts with a very clear priority: decisively favoring local food production over imports, even when it comes to aid.
Even for aid distribution. Interesting.
Yeah, the source argues that aid efforts need to actively stimulate and support domestic farming, not work against it.
Okay, so how do they suggest doing that, like practically?
Well, direct support for farmers is crucial. Providing essential inputs, things like good quality seeds, fertilizer, access to machinery, fuel.
The basic tools they need.
The basic tools, yeah, to help Sudanese farmers sustain production, maybe even expand it.
And it's not just about crops, is it? I mean, Sudan has a huge livestock sector.
Oh, absolutely. That's a big part of it, too. The recommendations really emphasize investing in livestock.
How so?
Things like urgent vaccination campaigns, disease control measures.
Yeah.
Especially focusing these efforts in areas that are relatively more stable right now. Protect those assets.
Makes sense. Protect what you still have. But what about the bigger picture? The infrastructure needed to make any of this actually work? Farming needs more than just seeds.
That's a massive piece, yeah. The source highlights the urgent need to rehabilitate critical agricultural infrastructure.
Like what specifically?
They specifically call out large-scale irrigation systems, like the Gezira project, which is vital. That's seen as absolutely key to restoring productivity on a wider scale.
Because without reliable water.
Exactly. It's incredibly hard to grow food consistently without reliable water.
So it really sounds like this isn't just, tweaking the current aid system a bit. It's a whole reimagining of it.
It really is. The call is to fundamentally shift the whole international humanitarian strategy in Sudan. Move away from being primarily focused on emergency food distribution.
The bandage approach.
The bandage approach, yes. And towards these more localized, sustainable support models that actually build capacity within the country.
And does this shift also involve supporting the businesses connected to farming?
Yes, definitely. The recommendations also talk about strengthening small and medium-sized food processing industries.
Why them specifically?
Well, they're seen as these vital links in the whole food value chain. Everything from growing the food to getting it processed and actually onto people's plates. Supporting them helps keep the value inside Sudan.
Right, keeps the money local. And what about localizing the aid efforts themselves? Who delivers the aid?
Yeah, that's another key point. The source argues that putting local actors, actual Sudanese organizations and communities in the lead for aid delivery, well, it can significantly cut costs.
And probably be more effective.
More effective, exactly, because they understand the local context intimately. And critically, it builds that long-term self-reliance we talked about.
It feels like all these different threads, they connect back to a bigger point the source seems to be making about agriculture being more than just, food.
It absolutely does. They make a really strong case that agriculture isn't just another sector. It's foundational.
Foundational for what?
For Sudan's macroeconomic recovery, for social stability, and really for the whole process of national reconstruction. Rebuilding the country, in their view, it starts with rebuilding its ability to feed itself.
Wow. That's a powerful perspective. Okay, so let's try and sum this up for you, the listener. The main takeaway from these Fikra SD recommendations is really clear, isn't it?
It is. It's a compelling argument for a complete paradigm shift.
Right. Moving away from relying so heavily on imported emergency aid towards a strategy built on this idea of locally anchored resilience.
Which means prioritizing and investing in Sudan's own domestic production, both crops and livestock.
And rehabilitating that key infrastructure like irrigation, strengthening local food businesses, and localizing the aid efforts themselves.
And underpinning all of it is viewing agriculture not just as a source of food, but as the absolute bedrock, the foundation for economic recovery, social stability, and ultimately national rebuilding.
Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on, building on what the source suggests. If this transition, this shift from primarily emergency import-based aid to a sustainable localized system, if that's truly the necessary path forward, what are the biggest, most practical challenges in actually making that happen, especially on the ground in a country still facing crisis?
Yeah. And what does locally anchored resilience truly look like? What would it feel like for the average person living in Sudan day to day? Something to think about.